One, we are live. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Special Education Legal Fund's third webinar of the 2025-2026 academic year. My name is Christine Lai, and I'm the Executive Director and co-founder of Special Education Legal Fund. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our 2025 corporate sponsors, particularly our Villa Maria School, who is our featured sponsor of this evening's webinar. The generous support of our sponsors makes this webinar program, as well as so much else of what we do, possible. I'd like to acknowledge WealthSpire Advisors and Eagle Hill School at the Platinum level, at the Gold level, Winston Preparatory School, at the Silver level, American School for the Deaf, Villa Maria School, Chapel Haven Schleifer Center, Fusion Academy, Spire School, and the Pinnacle School, and at the Bronze level, our friends at the Windward School. Thank you all. Thank you to our 2025 corporate sponsors. We could not do what we do without you. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, I'd like to take a moment to introduce Special Education Legal Fund. Special Education Legal Fund was founded in 2018 to provide resources, knowledge, and support to families in need with children in the special education system. Since then, we've provided over $1.3 million in grants to hundreds of students in the special education systems in Connecticut and New York. Our grants over the past 7 years have provided over 7,400 hours of legal support to those families, and our advocate grants have provided over 2,000 hours of advocacy support to the families receiving those grants. And since 2018, our grants have yielded over $15 million in educational improvements for the students that have received those grants. For more information about us and what we do, please visit our website at www.spedlegalfund.org. I'm going to take a minute to talk about the new self because that is germane for this year. In September of 2025, this year, we launched a legal aid program with staff attorney Laura Sullivan, who will now be providing in-house legal support in the special education field for families that qualify and are under the federal minimum poverty level, 125% of the federal minimum poverty level. We are continuing to provide our advocate grant, which is a $6,000 grant provided to families, and our attorney grant, a $6,000 grant provided to families, and our advocate grant, which is a $1,500 grant provided to families. In addition, we have this parent education series, which are webinars, the resource fair in March, and our multilingual special education curriculum, Proyecto, which is all available on our website. Just to sum up on the legal aid and the grants programs, we're offering 3 programs through which families can secure legal or advocacy support. The legal aid program, as I mentioned, which is staff attorney support, direct special education legal services through SELF. The attorney grant program, which is a $6,000 legal support grant, which can be applied to work through a qualified special education attorney. And the advocate grant program, which is a $1,500 grant for advocacy support from a qualified non-attorney special education advocate. You will begin the process for all 3 of these programs by visiting our website. As I said, www.spedlegalfund.org. You can do the little QR code thingy here. And when you get to our website, you can also click the Apply Now, and that will take you to the page where you select the grant program that you'd like to apply to. Finally, my last little commercial of the evening is, just about, 8 days from now, something like that. We will have our annual fundraiser of the year, which is Homecoming for Self. It is an event that's super, super fun. It's very casual. It's trying to bring, a school homecoming, fall type of vibe. Nobody dresses up. Everybody wears sweatshirts and their college outfits. And this year we are honoring the Reverend Sean Guerin and his wife, Ashley Guerin, who have been really integral component of SELF throughout its development. And we're also very, very happy to, to bring everybody back to together to celebrate yet another year of amazing changes and support for families in need with the children in the special education system. So join us Saturday, October 18th at the Boys and Girls Club in Greenwich. You can scan this QR code to get to the website for tickets to make a donation. No amount is too small, and all your support is really, really important to what we do at SELF. I don't know why I have a bio here, but that's me. My name is Christine Lai, obviously, and I'm the co-founder and executive director of Special Education Legal Fund. And this evening, I'm very pleased to moderate this exceptional panel. Starting out this evening, we are so thrilled to welcome back Bill DeHaven, who is a 9-time panelist for Self. I think that makes you the chip leader. Um, Bill has been the head of Villa Maria School for the past 5 years, 6 years. And he really is a veteran educator who, having spent over 20 years at the Winston Preparatory School in New York prior to joining the Fairfield County special education community in 2020. I at least was very, very thrilled when Bill got to Villa Maria. It was really, I think, a real gift to our community. So I'm thrilled that he's come back. I'm thrilled that he's joining us for this panel. And welcome back, Bill.
Thank you, Christine.
Our next panelist is Virginia Blum. Virginia is a special education advocate based in Greenwich at the law office of Meredith Braxton, and she is an exceptional advocate on the behalf of families all over the state. Previously, Virginia's appeared on our webinar series previously, and she's also hosted our Lunch and Learn series, which, if you haven't seen it, is a really, really great resource. It's available on our website. It covers the referral process, prior written notice, present levels of performance, and preparing for the annual review meeting. So if you are looking to, freshen up on any of those topics, I would highly suggest checking out our website it's spedlegalfund.org, and you can go under Watch and go to Lunch and Learn. There's a little tab for it. Virginia is also a member of our board of directors, and Virginia and I have been, kind of on this special education journey together. We're kind of partners in arms. Although, and I remember, when I was thinking about starting Self, and Virginia, you were starting out, in advocacy, and I remember saying to you that I couldn't do what you do. Actually, can't do what any of you do. You guys do the hard work. You do the real work of what makes change, and that remains true today. So congratulations. Thanks for joining me this evening. Welcome, Virginia. Our next panelist is Dr. Lauren Riordan. From the Waverly Group. Lauren is a clinical psychologist and really a brilliant diagnostician whose evaluations are insightful and detailed and incredibly, incredibly thoughtful. This is her second appearance on a Self webinar series, not for lack of trying. I think I've probably asked, at least one time for every time she's appeared, and she keeps turning me down. But we're really, really pleased to have you join us and to share your expertise, on this panel with us this evening. So welcome, Lauren. And finally, last but not least, I am so excited to welcome back attorney Jennifer Laviano to our panel. Jen is a special education attorney with the firm Laviano Gagne, but her bio really, I was looking at it here, and it doesn't really do her justice. She is the author of several books on special education law for parents, with the really catchy title, What Your School District Isn't Telling You. And Jen is really a compassionate, determined, strong advocate for her families. And I think that, school districts and, opposing counsel, probably do a little shiver when they, when they see Jen's name on the, as the attorney on the other side. This is Jen's, I think, fourth webinar with us. Previously, she's done, mediation due process, a webinar on attorneys and advocates, but we're super excited to have you back this evening, Jen. Thank you so much for joining us. And because it's a webinar and I have to read a disclaimer, this webinar panel is presented for informational purposes only. This webinar is intended as a resource for families who are navigating the special education system in Connecticut or New York, and is not intended to provide legal support, advice, or assistance to any particular individual, nor is it intended to replace the advice and counsel of a qualified special education attorney. Families in need of legal advice, support, or assistance should contact a special education attorney licensed to practice in Connecticut or New York or their state of residence to discuss the specific needs of their individual student. This webinar should not be construed as an endorsement by Special Education Legal Fund or any of its representatives of any of the participating attorneys, advocates, other professionals in the panel, nor should it be construed as an endorsement of any school or school representative invited to appear on this panel. For the webinar participants, This panel should be viewed as a public forum. Please do not ask questions via the Zoom platform in the Q&A or the chat about your child or your child's specific legal or educational situation. Refrain from comments that include identifiable information about your child, including name, grade, school, or school district. Please remember that your screen name may be visible to the participants in this panel, to the panelists and Special Education Legal Fund. This webinar is being recorded and may be distributed or shown at a later date and time. If you would like to ask a question in the webinar, I will put my email in the chat, and you can feel free to ask questions anonymously that way. And here we go. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This webinar is really a topic that is near and dear to my heart. It's it's kind of that time of year. The honeymoon is off, might have worn off. The school year might be starting to look a little bit wobbly, and maybe you as parents are starting to get more phone calls from school. Maybe you're picking up your child from school or at the bus stop, and they're in tears. Or maybe your student's trying to fight you in the morning when you start to try to get them ready or put them on the bus. Maybe they're not refusing, but it's starting to get a little bit challenging in the morning. So I wanted to talk about 3 ways in which the school year could be going awry. And for me that for me looks like academic, but they're all related, is academic, behavioral, and social. But before we do that, it's October, 8th. Your child's been in school for, a month or so. When should I begin worrying? Who wants to take that?
Maybe worry is not what I think is good communication. So, I always encourage people to meet the new team, have a meeting. It's very informal, and say, I know my kid. This is how summer went. This is what I'm dealing with, and let's partner together. So, if you kind of try to set the stage a little bit, hopefully the teachers feel compelled to kind of loop you in before the wheels come off the bus, so you can nip things in the bud. So the first night the kid comes home and maybe homework is a lot and they're crying, an email. This didn't go great. Can you give me some pointers and help that? And then start tracking it so that if it's continuing to be a pattern, you address that in a more formal way. But I think good communication at the outset can help you get information. Maybe it looks differently from the school's perspective. So that would be my first suggestion at every start of school year. Meeting your entire team, introducing yourself, and also kind of letting the barriers down. I know my kid. My kid is not perfect, and I want to know and see the real kid. That always worked well for me.
I think Virginia's point is excellent, and one thing I think parents should get in the practice of doing is at the annual review meeting in the spring, ask that one of the recommendations of the PPT be that you meet in October. And that way you're not being responsive. And now we know the nature of scheduling these meetings can be difficult. And all of a sudden we're up against Thanksgiving. And before you know it, half the year's over, right? So get in the habit of asking that you just, as a matter of course, reconvene that meeting in October, right? Because this is around when parents start to get the sense that things may not be going well. And when are you worried? My answer to that is always listen to your instincts. If you're worried,
that's a great idea. It's like scheduling your dental appointment when you're
just as good proactive management. It's true. Parents are seeing their child year after year, but there's often a new team year after year. So it's just a good habit to get into, to say, let's all meet in the fall so that I can see how things are going, enough time into the year to know whether or not it's just a bump, but also enough time for them to get to know your child.
And I think that it's often easy for our kids who have not yet been identified, for families who are beginning to wonder what this is. Virginia's point is a great one. If I'm spending way too much time at homework, there's changes in attitude. And often as parents, we dismiss those, especially as our kids are going from another grade, another team, another school. Oh, this is just natural. But your kids, and those are the times. And I think the communication is absolutely important to let that teacher know. and then that's going to be really important as you go down the line. Documenting everything in writing is so important, so you have a trail of, I've asked this question, how do you know that my kid's doing well? Can you tell me, how are you monitoring their progress?
Oh, you're skipping ahead. You're
Oh,
skipping
sorry.
ahead.
Sorry, I'll stop.
Yeah, yeah.
Lauren?
And I always say to parents, you guys are the experts on your children. You know them best. And, those little subtle signs, Christine, you mentioned some things about, harder to get out the door in the morning. It can be really, really subtle, those stomach aches that start cropping up.
Yeah.
And, you got to just listen for those little signs, and
Yeah.
parents know their kids best.
Yeah. Because all those things, are, sort of behavioral indications that, something might not be going exactly as planned. How long do you feel and this is kind of a loaded question, but, how long should the adjustment period be at the beginning of the year?
It's a great
Well,
question.
that depends on the kid. I mean, you know, for my child with on the spectrum, I would not want an adjustment period because then behavior can snowball and a pattern can emerge. But for another kid, maybe that's a little shyer, they might need more time to adjust to classroom routines. So I do think that's a loaded question, and I think I would defer to the parent to set, the strengths and weaknesses. So if it feels different or it feels not good,
Mhm.
reach out immediately. I really encourage that. And another tip Jen mentioned, like kind of a 30-day or an October PPT. I always put like a weekly communication log. So like a shared Google Doc between, so you don't have to email and, oh, I don't know who the new case manager is or those cases, but like a shared Google Doc that's on the accommodations as the related service providers and the teacher will give me kind of a high and a low, or a positive and something to work on, however they want to phrase it.
Mhm.
And also an opportunity for the parent to say, Johnny had trouble getting to school, or Johnny's continuing to tell me that he can't do his math, or he doesn't have any friends. I can't set up play dates. Like whatever that piece is, an opportunity to share that information. And an informal team meeting, like, so schools will say, we have parent conferences in November. Well, I don't want to wait till November. I want to meet, September, October, and November. So, having that in the IEP as a scheduled kind of mandated thing, give me that schedule at the beginning of the year so I know when my team meetings are. Um, is a good, again, I think communication really helps a lot.
That's a great tip. Can you really schedule like can you be like, I want to have a team meeting in October and one in December? And I mean, can you
And
do
it's all
that?
negotiated, but I mean, I certainly think it is completely appropriate to say I want a 30-minute check-in, agenda driven with whatever concerns I might have or the school team might have. So maybe you're not concerned about, I don't know, fine motor, so the occupational therapist doesn't need to come, but really that communication speech component and the learning
Like whatever
component
your concerns are.
or the social piece, like, but I don't think that's an unrealistic expectation for a parent, or a district, especially with it's individualized. But I put it on the IEP as mandated
Yeah.
under accommodations.
It doesn't have to be a PPT every month, just a
No,
team.
it's not.
Yeah.
And
It's a team
a
meeting.
handful of people doesn't have to have every person who's required to be at a PPT, but just
Yeah.
a check-in, a short check-in. I think that's reasonable.
Usually it doesn't have the administrator, so you can kind of get some good information.
That's super, super helpful.
Oh, I love the idea, sorry, of
Yeah, go ahead.
of building those meetings in, and I'm gonna
I know. I was like, that's
my
a good idea.
reports.
That's a good idea.
But I really do, because if you can get ahead of the problem, that would be amazing, right? Instead of being reactive,
Right.
whoever
And
said,
trying to
be
schedule something
proactive.
and you like when you're already
Yeah.
sort of in crisis or whatever. Bill, I wanted to sort of ask you because I know you've handled this every year, for your new students that are new to your school. Every year obviously brings your new cohort of students. If it's a new school, completely new environment, how long is realistic for the team to kind of get to know that child?
Again, that's tough. I mean, when you arrive at a Villa Maria or any of our sister schools, you're arriving with a lot of information.
Yeah.
We're asking for a neuropsych. We're
Yeah.
already having lots of conversations with prior schools. But still, the kids are at that point just data. We may have spent a day with them. It's really getting to know them in our, in our home, in their new home. It gets tough, but I think that by now we've made class changes already. When kids come in and we thought one thing and then we see another. And again, another thing that's really important for parents and I think Lauren would agree, even a great evaluation sometimes, especially for our complicated kids, a snapshot of a kid over the course of that testing period. And so it could be a great evaluation where I really have a great understanding. And then Bill shows up, and Bill's a lot more complicated or a lot less complicated.
Right.
But again, this idea of communication is so important. And, families arrive at a place like Villa. You've had a fight for so long that you're ready with all of the questions. You're inundating the teachers with information. And I don't want to discourage families from doing that, especially before you find the right fit. We're going to say it over and over again tonight. You are your kids' best advocates, and you have to continue to ask the questions and just ask questions. You don't have to be unkind about it. It's going to seem overwhelming. You are going to frustrate people, but just ask questions. You're being an advocate for your kid. And do that when you arrive at a Villa Maria too. Don't just think that because you found what you think is the right place.
Right.
Keep asking questions.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. That's a really important point. I'm glad you made that.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing too, and then Bill, this might be dovetailing yours, is if you don't understand what's written on the IEP, like the goal, if it doesn't make sense to you, then ask the question. Because I can't tell you how many times I've picked up. I mean, I'm not an SLP. I'm not a behavior analyst, anybody. And if I don't understand what they're talking about and it's too complex, then they need to break it down for me. And they should explain it to me, and it should be very clear on the IEP what they're trying to measure and how they're measuring it. So, read your document. You are an equal member of that team. So if you don't understand it, maybe that person picking it up the next year isn't going to understand it or is going to do it differently. So that's another thing to sort of make sure you have a handle on and make sure you're understanding how the data is running through.
When you don't have an evaluation written by a Lauren, sometimes or by the district that are there, it's testing and it's regurgitation from whatever the testing site gives you, and it's not a lot of information beyond a label for your kid. And labels are not helpful to better understand your kid. And so you should push for that explanation. Can you help me better understand these?
That's really nuanced and thoughtful and
help them just to break that down. We try and do that in our admissions process because it's a lot and it's overwhelming. And even if you had a great evaluator go through it with you, you're still overwhelmed because this is all brand new. So keep asking questions.
So we're kind of edging into this because we're talking a little bit about evaluations, but let's move to to talk about sort of academic progress during how do you get a read on your child's progress so far in the year in an October kind of Halloween kind of time frame and how they're doing academically? How do you do that, Jen?
Probably the least qualified person to say how to measure progress, but other than the legal analysis of it. But I would say this: yes, communication is key. Yes, you want to make sure you're getting valid data, and if and I know I'm jaded. I'm coming at this from the perspective of being brought in when things have gone horribly wrong,
Mhm.
so much so that a parent feels that they need a lawyer. But what I would say is, if your instincts as a parent are that your concerns are being downplayed, which happens frequently, and sometimes not necessarily because the team's being intentionally dismissive. It's that the nature of schools is sort of, let's wait and see.
Yeah.
Let's give it a little more time. It's the
Yeah.
start of the school year. And that's fair. But if you feel like it's been stop or rewind play at the beginning of every single school year for years and years and years, where you've been saying, we're now in October and I'm still not seeing that my child is keeping up with their non-disabled peers or even close. I get why a new teacher would say, well, but it's early. But
Mhm.
if it's been happening year after year after year for you, then maybe it's time to ask for an evaluation with someone like Dr. Riordan, or someone who you feel is not part of, and this is, I'm not trying to sound pejorative to school districts, but the reality is that the evaluators who are employees of school districts have an inherent bias. It doesn't mean that they're intentionally trying to mislead you, but they have to make recommendations that their boss has to implement. And in some school districts, the culture is not subtle, that they don't want you to make recommendations for expensive or costly or a tremendous amount of investment of the team's time, because they have a lot of students to program for. That's why Congress gave parents the right to ask for an independent evaluation. So um,
Which is one of the
I
most important
the
rights.
most important right. Probably that and stay put, which we don't have to talk about tonight,
Right.
but those are the two strongest procedural protections. And so, what I say when friends call me, or family members call me, or friends of friends say, "Oh, I have a friend who's a special ed lawyer, you should talk to them." I can't even begin to know how to help your child or advocate for them unless I have an evaluation by somebody I trust. And it's got to be someone who doesn't have a vested interest in the outcome of the recommendations. And that's why you have a right to an independent evaluation. So while it's early in the school year, and I caution whether you're in a private school or you're in a public school, being sympathetic to the teachers who are just getting to know your child and doing their best and usually are pretty well intentioned. I caution that if you still feel like this is another year that you're afraid your child's about to waste, you can't
Don't
act too
wait.
soon. Don't
Don't
wait.
don't wait.
Can you
Lauren,
jump in
let's
about
let's
progress?
go to you and talk a little bit about like how you would approach you know assessing whether a child is making progress at this stage in the year.
Well, so, the types of assessments that I do obviously are very comprehensive neuropsych
Hmm.
evaluations. So I don't do the kind of progress monitoring that
Hmm.
they do within the schools, but more so kind of looking globally, what's happening for this child,
Right.
where are the pitfalls, why are they not learning with this program that they're
Hmm.
getting at school? Um, and oftentimes, I probably do way more independent educational evaluations than I do private at this point.
Hmm.
So, per Jen's point, it's your right, and to ask for that evaluation done by an independent evaluator.
Hmm.
But so I obviously look at all the school data. I'm not so jazzed up about the iReady and things like that they do at school, because that doesn't give me a whole lot of information. Um, and the other thing is that I need to watch the child, and I need to see how perf what how are they actually working on a problem, or how
Hmm.
are they trying to read a word. Just because I find out that they can read this many words, I didn't hear how they read them.
Hmm.
And are they sounding things out, or is it all sight words?
Hmm.
Have they just memorized? So these are the kinds of things that I'm looking for. So it's not just actually the scores of the tests on the tests, but how they're getting to
We're
those
taking in the
scores.
information.
Yeah, yeah.
And one thing, Lauren, you brought up a really good point. I was going to say about some of the beginning of year assessments like iReady. They don't really often go deep enough to give us information enough to inform goals and objectives. So, I do sort of like the dibbles, which I know is some districts use, because that goes a little deeper. But remember, that's a 1 minute screener.
Hmm.
So again, you're not really getting that in-depth information. So the other thing to sort of ask for, but and maybe you do this as you're preparing to think about an IEE, is give me some work samples. back up your data. If you tell me my kid is doing this 4 out of 5 times and I'm at home and he can't write a sentence, then I want to see, his on-demand writing versus his conference writing where I have no idea how much time he spent conferencing and how many preps, or I had one teacher or a para, the kid was maybe speaking and the para is writing the sentence and the kid's writing it down. That's not authentic writing. So I think asking, to Bill's point, asking a lot of questions, but give me some work samples. If you never see your child's writing in, third, fourth, fifth grade, that's a problem. So, or if he's coming home and you don't see him being able to produce the same thing that the report cards say, you need to ask the questions, get the work samples, ask for something deeper than the screeners. I never ask for, to Jen's point, anything that's normed referenced or anything that allows the district to do more testing because that waives my right to an IEE, which I don't like. But there's a lot of other information you can get before you get to that level. And there's a lot of non-standardized measures that go a little deeper, that are not stuff that Lauren in her practice would do, but that can give us a lot of educational information.
That's what all good teachers are supposed to be doing. We can move past progress monitoring into formative assessments, which really, as I talk to teachers, it's how do you know what you know in order to teach tomorrow? So what small little assessment, Virginia is absolutely right. In order to make that decision about what I'm going to teach, I need to see what my kids are doing
today.
So I need to create some kind of mini assessment, some kind of mini writing prompt. In a lot of classrooms, it's an exit slope. How do I know the information I know? Because you're right, they could be getting lots of support at school. So they go home to do it independently and it looks very different. Mm-hmm. So how do the teachers know what they know and how did you get that information? And especially for our kids who have IEPs, that's all built in. And so it's a really important process. I have a friend who refers to the IEP like a gym membership, and it's only as good as often as you use it. So if it's built in and if it's written once a year and the teacher's not looking at it, you're not looking at it, well, then it's not going to be very helpful. But if you work really hard to put the pieces in, whether it's progress monitoring, I love these informal meetings but I'm going to encourage that too, to encourage more of these mini meetings, not with the whole team, not with the whole PPT, but these mini meetings just to give you more information and have that in there and then use it and then remember it's in there.
Virginia, I had you just say, Virginia, sorry, what did you just say about if you ask for more testing, does it kind of invalidate your right to an IEE?
I don't ask for them to do normed reference. I mean, that's kind of anything that is something that would be on an evaluation, because again, they're going to make me sign consent. Like if they say, oh, sure, we'll do it. You need to sign consent, put your radar up. You don't want to sign consent.
You don't want to sign. You don't have any formal testing,
Right. But if they all do baseline, beginning of the year, middle of the year, all do that.
That are not.
And you can ask for a little bit deeper dive into some of that. I was just going to say one IEP, for a kid that wasn't writing so great in middle school, we had them do an on-demand writing prompt every month, and it was sent home. And what was really interesting about that was after a year of that, we could sit down and say, here's the sample in October and here's the sample in May.
Yeah.
And there is no progress. It was still two simple sentences. They weren't using the vocabulary. Right. So how were you able to then calibrate or code these objectives? Because I'm looking at this with no growth. And that was a really powerful tool that didn't have it was just an on-demand. So, right. We should see growth in the child's ability to, use the tools that the teacher's teaching them on writing to incorporate that into a natural writing when they have no support. And that was something we didn't see.
Can you talk a little bit, Jen, maybe about what kind of testing that, or Lauren or Virginia or anyone, what kind of testing would you need to sign a release for? I have a question in the chat, which is, Virginia, you were just saying, you can get data by, without having, like formal testing done. But, this participant is saying, if the school says, oh, we don't need a release for that, like what do we need a release for?
Okay, so there's a difference between a release and a consent. Okay, so parents are required under the law to provide informed consent. And I say that on purpose because with CT SEDS and all of the difficulties we've had with CT SEDS, I have real concerns about whether or not some consents that are out there are actually informed because parents aren't necessarily given the full information before they sign the consent, and the system sometimes doesn't let them access the information until after they've signed consent, and even board attorneys, and I agree that's not necessarily informed consent. A release is different. A release is usually an ability to communicate with a third party. And so the kinds of tests that they need your consent to perform are those which would not be just, internal curriculum-based assessments where they're progress monitoring or the whole class is getting it, that they don't need consent for. But if they're going to do a standardized measure assessment, an individualized assessment of your child that's different from what the classroom is getting or what the school is getting or the state is giving, then they do need your informed consent. That's a very simple way of boiling down a really complex issue. And in Connecticut, we do have some tricky case law that makes this even more complicated because we have a really terrible decision out of our Second Circuit Court of Appeals from several years ago involving independent evaluations and FBAs, which are functional behavioral assessments, which for years schools needed consent to conduct, and parents had a right to an independent evaluation if they disagreed with it. And this case makes it very complicated. So there's a lot of these sort of regional things that happen all over the country where you get decisions and you live with them and either try to change it legislatively or we work around it as advocates. But generally speaking, I would say that if they're doing an individualized, standardized assessment of your child, they need your consent to do so.
Perfect. Let's move.
Another thing I just wanted to say a little something about that. If you're in a meeting and you're asking these questions and they say, "Oh, that's great. Let's reevaluate." I would say, wow, if you're asking, sounds to me like we need an independent evaluation. So if they start saying if listening to this, they start saying, oh, well, we can do all this other stuff, my radar as an advocate would go up and say, it sounds to me like we might need to pull in an independent evaluation at this point because we all don't really know. So that would be a way to sort of if that meeting starts to lean that way for the parent to say, maybe I should think about an IEE versus allowing the district to do additional testing. Because, if you allow the additional testing, you're sort of eroding your right to that IEE.
And that's what we kind of went back to with your original, point about that. In terms of, still on the academic topic, but, what if, and Bill, you alluded to this, in your very initial comments, but, what's a reasonable, length of time to wait before, or not wait, before ratcheting up and down, in a class? Like it's this time of year, how do you know if, the class is too easy, the class is too hard, you have to shift classes? What's your sort of, guidance for that?
I guess, it's a little bit different. I'm in a more ideal situation at school where we're in control of those decisions.
Right.
And I think that in a public school, especially if I have not yet been identified and I'm a class of 24, how do I know what support? Again, we're going to keep going back to this. It's asking for that information so that you can see where your kid's struggling. The difficult thing that the schools are in a difficult position. I've got a group of 24 fourth graders to teach fourth grade, whatever Connecticut or New York has decided is important. And it's about content. And our kids are learning differently, and they have got decoding struggles or comprehension struggles. They've got executive functioning struggles. It's not about the content for them. They need specific skills in order to learn that content. And so at what point do you decide that they're being overwhelmed? And it goes back to what we talked about in the beginning. The first things you see as a parent is those changes in behavior. You see changes in resistances to do homework or it taking a long time to do that homework. And those are those first signals that you're like, I've got to ask those questions and go in and talk to the teachers.
Just one other point I just want to make before you go to your next question. One red flag for me is when I get records for a child and I see that the child is frequently going to the nurse's office, that's a signal that the child wants to not be in the classroom for some reason. So if you're maybe your child isn't giving you a hard time in the morning or anything like that, but if you're getting a lot of calls
school, they're going to the nurse,
but they're removing themselves from the classroom, that's a red flag.
Jen, that's such a good question.
That's such a good
point. The very first school I taught at in Trenton, New Jersey was founded by a former school nurse. And so she wanted to know why our kids landed in her office. So
that's great. Let's move on a little bit to sort of you've started the school year and you're some things aren't exactly working for your child. Like, what happens if for scheduling reasons or whatever, you feel like a lot of your child's services are during lunch or recess or during non-disabled time? How do you time with non-disabled peers? How do you kind of deal with that?
Well, so back, I mean, one good thing a tool to, I always get this for my families is ask for a week at a glance schedule. So I like to see, what does the week look like and where are the services being scheduled so that I have that sort of understanding. And Jen, you can say this. I mean, they cannot pull your kid out of lunch or recess to give them services. That's not appropriate and that's not legal. So that's a non-starter. If that's happening, clarify that. Because that's not okay.
Unless it's agreed upon, like there are lunch bunches that happen for kids who might need a social skills group or something during lunch. Pretty much anything can be agreed upon, but what happens far too frequently in our public schools is that families are given choices, especially when you get to middle and high school. Families are giving choices between your special education services, which you need, and those non-academic extracurricular or
that your kids enjoy.
They enjoy. In fact, sometimes it's the only thing they enjoy in their day.
It's like you can't go to art class because
it's a scheduling issue and they're not supposed to be making decisions based on scheduling issues.
Right.
But the week at a glance is a good tool for you to see what's happening and what your kid is missing in lieu of that piece. So if they're never exposed to English class, their ELA, that they're missing a lot of core content vocabulary, they're missing a lot of that exposure. Depending on the disability, that can be detrimental or it can be okay. It just depends.
And that's sort of an extension of like, I mean, a lot of this, obviously is, the school's going to, very often, talk about, the difficulty of scheduling, and like, how, I don't want to say real, but I'm going to say it like, how real is that as a complicating factor in like your child's, in the, services your child's getting, the IEP, their time, like, how should you as a parent think about that? I mean, because you want your child to get what.
Yeah. So I say this probably every day. You have to pick your battles as parents. You have to. You're just not going to get every single thing that you want. And you have to be understanding of the fact that this is a system, and that there are limitations on, when this speech pathologist is available and when this, however, you need to be documenting, these concerns. If your child loves participating in chorus and that's the only time that they're saying that your child can get a service, then you need to be going to, and frankly, those are some of the hardest battles I have. Harder sometimes than funding for out of district placement is getting them to change their schedule. And sometimes that means I've had to fight for, okay, well, if the person you have available isn't free that period, then I guess you're going to have to bring in a one-to-one tutor during a different period, and sometimes that heads to mediation where we negotiate it. But be reasonable, of course. You don't want to go in there as a parent and say, I have no concern for your schedule, other children, or the system, but you also have a right under the law to an individualized program and for for almost all cases, the focus is supposed to be on the least restrictive environment that's appropriate to meet your child's needs. Some kids need more restrictive programming at various points in their education, but if you're in the public schools, you should be getting what you're entitled to, and you shouldn't have to give up. Some parents want to give up. Some children want to give up a foreign language as an example if they're already struggling
Right.
with English. I
Right.
mean, and I think more schools should be doing like American Sign Language as an option for a foreign language because that it meets a lot
Meets
of
a requirement,
different
you
needs,
know,
right?
even though
But
it's not foreign as,
right, right. I know
you
exactly,
know,
exactly. Different language.
differently.
But ultimately, I think when it comes down to it, you should be advocating and kind of trying to see these things down the road. So if you have an older child and you know that they went to that school and these are the times where they had to, be
Yeah.
pulled if they had services, start get ahead of it as soon as possible because before you know it, the school year's over.
Yeah.
Yeah, and vis-a-vis not missing, art, music, whatever, it's really important that we also teach to their strengths and that we allow a child who is musically inclined or artistically inclined to have
Be
some
musical. Yeah.
success during the day
Yeah.
and feel good about themselves. So,
Well, and those unstructured periods, well, those structured yet unstructured periods, like an art or a music, really you learn negotiating skills, you learn compromise, you learn social skills, and maybe you're exposed to a different friend group or you find somebody. That's really important and part of education. So you have to balance that. The one thing that I don't love when I'm in a PPT meeting, and they say that the teacher says, well, yeah, we have evidence or maybe Dr. Warden's there and I'm saying, oh, but we need one-to-one reading. And they're saying, well, our schedule doesn't permit that. Like I do shut that down. Like that's not what we're here to talk about.
Mhm.
We're here to talk about your child's individual needs, not your
What you're
schedule. So I
scheduling. Yeah.
think that's a different nuance.
Yeah.
So when I'm planning services for a child, if the services haven't worked and we've kept them in that same group for a couple of years and that hasn't yielded what we think they're capable of or should be making meaningful progress, well, let's change it. Like let's do a smaller setting, let's do a higher frequency, let's do that. And I often hear, well, I can't, I'm not sure I can do that because I don't have that much speech time left in my schedule. That's not what I'm asking.
Right.
Like,
Right.
and so like I think
That's not my problem.
well, I mean, we can look at that at a glance outside of the
Yeah.
PPT because
Yeah.
scheduling is outside of,
Yeah.
but inside of,
A good strategy sometimes, sorry, Virginia, a good strategy sometimes with a situation like that is to say, so do we need to have an extended school day where my client's getting the services, the special education services after
After
school with
school.
somebody? And that usually is like, oh no, we'll figure this out here because that's gonna come at a price.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
Absolutely.
could have used that, Jen.
Absolutely. So we've talked a bit about, kind of academic, sort of how to move around in this, and figure out, academically what to do. Let's talk a little bit about social, what happens if your child's not meshing socially at this point in the year? Your child doesn't have any friends. What are the, sort of what's the first thing that you would do?
I think that comes back to partnering with the school,
Mhm.
and partnering with your teacher and getting in there and really, you know, trying to potentially think out of the box, And, I just said something before about the child's strengths. There might be something that your child is really into, and maybe they can,
And you can build on that.
yes, you can get, the teacher can be like, oh, Johnny's gonna tell us all about, even if it's
Legos or
Minecraft.
whatever.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
whatever. Yeah.
exactly. And then the other kids can,
Pokemon or whatever,
right,
yeah.
exactly. You're gonna find somebody who's into it,
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do think that going in with the intention of, I just need some help here
Mm.
from with the teacher. And
And who would be a great pal for Bill to hang out
yes,
with after school, and
yeah,
asking those questions because the
Yeah.
teachers know, they
Right.
can kind of see. And
Right.
even for our kids who are struggling socially,
Yeah.
they can see it. And with the kids with those similar interests.
Yeah.
Um,
Or maybe the kids have connected, but like, have hit a little bit of a stumbling block and need like, need a little push or need a little assistance.
Well, that's the work we do all the time, because our kids
Yeah,
are connected
absolutely.
at school, but then they get home and are like, well, no, I don't, they have no, but no. And so we try and encourage all those connections outside of school. And the same thing goes, as we prepare our kids to return back to the mainstream, connection is key, right? Connection with our kids with social pragmatic struggles is so unbelievably important. And finding your people, just like you're doing tonight, Christine, for all of the families. That's something that's important. Finding your people, your support group, the people you can lean on. But it's really important for our kids. And so at a little place like Villa Maria, the kids have found their people, but they're going to go to these bigger schools. And how do they begin to find their people? And sometimes it begins by finding that Lego club or a coding club or the art class. We have a kid who's started dancing outside of school in a larger group with their mainstream peers in order to then make that process a little bit easier. And that's a great recommendation for some parents when it doesn't look like it's really working. Outside of school, there are all of these wonderful little programs, and finding those ways in based on your kids' interest and their loves.
It's so important. And, the U.S. Department of Education for years now has taken the position that non-academics and extracurriculars are something that students with IEPs and 504 plans are entitled to have support in order to participate. And if that means that your child is a great athlete and they might need a paraprofessional to help them to access that, then that's something you should be asking for in that PPT or 504 meeting. What I will say is the suggestion that Bill made is excellent. If you have a child who's even in a more restrictive setting, like a state approved school, and you think that maybe they're going to transition back, ask your school district at that next meeting, is there a X club that maybe she can start going to now? So then when we do transition, they know some kids. Yeah.
We've got kids participating in high school sports now that we have
that actually happens more frequently than I realized. Is like, is kids, even if like maybe they're not going back to the district, but if they're, they are interested in a sport, have a skill, or just really like it, they can go, if they're, at a school like Villa or, whatever, they can have access to that, through their district.
And one thing Jen said about the after, lots of schools offer after school enrichment things. And it is possible to get a para to help with the social skills or, if there's a behavioral component piece to keep that child still accessing and exposing and generalizing those skills in that unstructured setting with proper support. So you can, attach, you can, depending on.
Does that also extend to like a before? Like the befores before school, or
I think any on school property. I mean, it's
like how some schools will have like a before school club for from 7:30 to whatever. Okay.
Arguably, the law in Connecticut on an entitlement to participate in your school district's activities if you are placed at a state approved school is different through your IEP, is different than the law if you are unilaterally placed either at that state approved school, or meaning you're paying for it or you're sharing the cost with the school district, or if it's a non-approved school. So many school districts have policies about whether you can participate, and the only clear law on your right to do so with your school district is if your child is placed through their IEP at a state approved school, they must allow you to participate in those extracurriculars and non-academics. The others can be battle.
I was thinking, actually thinking more, specifically about, the programs that are available at your actual, your district school, like whether they be before school or after school, if you need, a paraprofessional or support to access those, is that something that is realistic to?
I mean, again, if your kid has a one-to-one aide for the entire school day, it's very easy to argue.
It seems like logical
that they should be able to have access after school, and they're going to require that support. If they don't need that level, or maybe it's shared, but if they don't have any para support, it's going to be a non-starter because they don't require that during the school day. Why would they require it after the school day?
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. and the last, kind of, area that I wanted to, sort of touch on, because, we talked a little bit about, I mean, obviously this webinar is about, what happens if the school year is not going well? What do I do? And we've talked about academic, we've talked about social, and now we have I've left not enough time to talk about, behavioral and what should I do if my child's behavior at school has deteriorated markedly since the beginning of the year.
It's everything we've been talking about. It is finding Lauren and that evaluation. What I talk about often is, and if I can stereotype for a second, especially with my boys, if Bill is a 10-year-old boy who can't decode the words on the page, the last thing I want to let anybody know is that I can't read the words on the page.
Right.
So I'm going to be the knucklehead.
Yeah.
Or if Bill is the kid who can decode, but I can't understand, I'm going to shut down and be quiet and kind of hide, or I'm going to go see the nurse.
Right.
And, when a lot of those behaviors, and again, it is more stereotypical with the boys. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen with the girls. But when those behaviors happen, I want to know why. What is causing this change? And often it's a struggle in reading or my executive functions that make it impossible for me to participate.
Bill, I love that point you made about I want to know why, because one of the things that I often ask for is ABC data, which, what happened before the behavior, what happened after the behavior. And so if I get a kid that the teacher's saying, well, I'm going to give Johnny a detention, or he's got to stay after school because of this, and this kid has an IEP with attention deficit disorder, we're not going to punish this kid for his disability. We have to understand what is it about that environment that's causing that dysregulation, and how can we proactively set Johnny up for success, and that to me, so, I often ask for immediately, I want, observations, start collecting the data. Maybe I need a PPT because I need an FBA, or if I have a behavior plan, I need to be really looking not only at the maladaptive, that bad behavior, whether it's, worst case, throwing something, but also like, how am I systematically increasing the replacement behavior? So I want to see the behavior go down that way, but I also want to see skill development go the other way. So looking at both of those concurrently, helps ensure that child is learning a skill and doing better the next time.
I just always look at it that behavior is telling us something. A child's behavior is trying to say something. It's trying to communicate.
I think that's the theme of this whole webinar.
Yes.
Yeah.
The theme of this whole webinar
what is child trying to tell us? If things are going well, they would like to be doing well, right?
Exactly.
We have to assume that. So it's telling us something. What is it telling us? And unfortunately, I think we're in a time in education where certainly a lot of educators respond to behavior by removing the child
in a punitive way.
Yeah, right. And that escalates into a vicious cycle for a lot of our clients are acting out in some ways because they want to be in the general education environment with all of their peers, and they're being removed, and to remove them when they act out is then vicious cycle into
this behavior loop.
And I would guess that Bill hears a lot of stories like that from applicants, that there are behavioral issues and that are really from the ego insult of not being able to do what their peers are doing.
I had the conversation yesterday with one of my new 9th grade boys who's had all kinds of things in all of his reports coming from school, and even in an evaluation. And we meet a kid and you're like, is this the same kid? Because he's a sweetheart because he just wasn't in the right place.
Right. And because he's able to, now with support, perform in a way that you knew that he could.
Yes.
Or she, or whoever, Yeah. It's true. I mean, it's, it's so interesting that, we talk a lot about, with kids, it's like, oh, we have to, there's a, if we fix the child, we have to do these things so the child does this right and that right. And sometimes a lot of it is like, well, why don't we just think about the environment and what and what's happening in the environment? Because you would never, have a plant, some of you've probably heard me say this before, but, if you had a plant that wasn't growing, you would never look at the plant and be like, what's wrong with you? You'd be like, well, it's not getting enough sun, or it's not getting water, or the pot's too small, or whatever. You would look at the environment. And that is, I think a really, philosophical way to end this webinar on, what to do when the school year is going awry. I want to thank our panelists, Jennifer Laviano, Bill DeHaven, Lauren Riordan, and Virginia Blum for joining us this evening. And I actually forgot in my introduction to plug our next webinar, which is on November 11th. The topic is escaping me at the moment, but it's going to be a good one because Laura Sullivan, our staff attorney, will be moderating it. It's going to be amazing. And so you can sign up at the same place that you signed up for this one. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening, and be well. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine.